Everybody. Welcome to our presentation this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you're tuning in from. Every dollar counts, finding the hidden opportunities that create rapid ROI. So in this upcoming post-COVID world, we know that there are going to be tighter budgets and even leaner staff that's going to make every dollar count. When you combine that with the average building wasting 30% of its energy, it's easy to see that managing energy is important. And even more so when you have low to no cost operational and behavioral changes, you can understand how it's manageable and it's easy to take that first step. So in our presentation, we're going to be covering a couple of different things, common data analysis tactics to locate utility waste and energy project opportunities, advanced ways to identify utility waste using near real-time data, how to take advantage of different incentive and rebate programs that might be applicable to you and your organization, and some best practices on how to measure, verify, and communicate your savings. So just a couple of housekeeping items before I jump into the agenda. Just FYI, your lines are muted. So if you've tried to speak, you've probably figured out by now that we cannot hear you. We will have time at the end for Q&A, so please feel free to utilize the Q&A feature that's located on your toolbar at the bottom. If you scroll over your screen, you should see it. Use the Q&A or chat feature. We've got time at the end to address all the questions. And this presentation is also going to be recorded and will be sent around afterwards. So in case you want to share it with people who weren't able to attend or want to share it internally with your organization, feel free to do that. So Dan, if you can go to the next slide. So here is our roadmap for today's presentation. This is going to be around 30 to 40 minutes, and then we're going to have about 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A. But first, we're just going to talk about not the problem, but the opportunity that is waste, identifying it, acting upon it. Then we're going to talk about getting your data house in order. There are a ton of different valuable data sources, and it's not as hard as you would think to get that data into one centralized place. Then once we've talked about that, we're going to identify how you can start creating that ROI-driven action list for different project opportunities and how to identify which ones might result in greater savings and which ones won't. Then lastly, we're going to talk about taking action, actually tracking that action, and the importance of celebrating success. So I'm going to go to the next slide and just introduce our presenters. So first off, we have Mr. Dan Arendt. He is a senior solutions consultant with us at Dude. He's been with the Dude since 2013, and he's a professional certified energy manager accredited through NC State. Dan's super passionate about empowering the private sector to reduce utility waste in their facilities and operations. My name is Zach Kunkel, and I'm a product marketing manager here at Dude Solutions, and I've been here for over 3 years. I'm responsible for driving go-to-market strategy, messaging, and positioning related to 2 of our product lines, but most importantly, our energy manager product. And then last but not least, we have Ms. Norma Konda, who has been an energy management account executive with the Dude for the past year. She's worked in both the senior living and acute hospital space to help clients better understand, manage, and reduce their energy costs. So now that I've introduced everybody, I'm going to turn it over to you, Dan, and take it away.
Very good. Very good. Thanks, Zach. And thanks everybody that's on the call with us. I'm really looking forward to kind of keeping the conversation flowing. So we appreciate your time. I actually want to come back to this slide here. It's really important. I think I just want to touch on this top bullet point. What we're gonna talk about today, especially in this kind of post-COVID world, or I guess right in the middle, we're still kind of fighting the battles, especially you all on the front lines, is really understanding that good energy management, and I would even take that a step further and say utility management, right? We can talk about water resources, we can talk about other commodities, but good management of your utilities, it's it's a true revenue stream, right? When done properly, and this is something that I see the private sector do so well, is just turn savings, from more efficient operations or more efficient facilities, turn those savings into a revenue stream. And so I don't want that, problem that's crossed out and turned into opportunity. I don't want that just to come across as kind of like a little salesy marketing type bullet point. Especially when dollars are disappearing here lately, there really is an opportunity to control some of that cost, and we'll talk about it later. But kind of jumping in, let's start there, is just recognizing that there is an opportunity. And when we say an opportunity, right, I know that many of you on the call today might be in varying stages, a different part of the journey, if you will, on reducing waste. And that's fine. But I think a great place to start is just understanding that there is opportunity. And what we mean by opportunity, let's just talk about the energy perspective, not even necessarily water or other commodities. According to Energy Star, and we've got the link here that we can send out as well, the average building wastes 30% of the energy it consumes because of inefficiencies. So we're not just talking, hey, I've got a building that's, 50 years old or 80 years old, or I've got, HVAC equipment or lighting technology that's outdated or whatever it might be. Now, those things do contribute to waste, but we're even talking some low, no-cost opportunities. I mean, the age-old, are we turning lights out when we leave the room, right? Are we heating or cooling spaces that are not occupied? And so before we really kick things off, we do have a poll. Zach, if you want to throw that up, because I just want to get an understanding of just those on the call. And can everyone see this? Let me drag it over here just in case. Is that showing up on the screen, Zach?
Yep, it's been launched.
Okay.
And just in case, and we've already seen some answers coming in, but the question is, how much, if any, are you currently tracking energy use and cost currently?
Mm-hmm. Perfect. And because like I mentioned, I know most of you, many of you might be in a different kind of starting place on this journey of managing utility resources and making sure we're not wasting. But there is the age-old saying of you can't manage what you don't measure. It's kind of like beating a dead horse because it's true, right? It may feel overused, but it's very true, and that's kind of what we're getting at here with this question.
Awesome. So Dan, I'm going to go ahead and end it, and
okay.
People should be able to see the results, but it looks like 55% of our respondents are paying the bills, but not tracking much. And then 45% are utilizing a spreadsheet or something similar to that to track basic line items.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, good, almost even split of just kind of paying the bills, assuming, we really can't do anything about this. Possibly we're just going to pay it and move on, or we're going to keep track of it in at least a spreadsheet. So a good even mix. Kind of continuing on with the same, we'll talk a little bit more about why that question is important here in a couple more slides. But again, kind of sticking with this first bullet point of what do we mean by waste? Energy, and we'll say energy rather than just utilities, but utilities are, they are a controllable cost. Now, that's not to say we can eliminate them completely. A recent study I read said, your utility bills make up about 16% of all controllable costs you have in your organization. So there's opportunity there. And as you can see here on this graph, it's typically the second or third largest line item in your budgets, right? Behind people, food, in this industry and other industries, it might be something that doesn't have to do food related, but it's typically the second or third largest line item in the budget. And that's what's interesting is we have systems to track, like take HR systems or payroll type systems. We have systems to manage the people side of things, which is the overwhelmingly largest line item. But a lot of times, as we just kind of saw on this poll, we either just pay the bills and move on, or at best we're tracking in a spreadsheet. the second or third largest line item in our budgets. And so that's what we want to talk about today. It's very important to take that a step further. Even if it is in a spreadsheet, there are some things we can talk about today that'll help you kind of make those a little better, because there's data within your utility bills and even other data sources that are going to help tell a story that we'll talk about here in a second. So what does 30% mean, right? When we talk about, hey, there's 30% opportunity or savings potential in a building, when we look across the various ways of where we can find opportunity, obviously we know some of the larger, right, space heating, space cooling, your HVAC loads are going to make up the majority of your opportunity. And again, that doesn't just mean, hey, I need to go out and buy the latest and greatest energy efficient technology. Savings don't have to come from capital projects. Now they can, and they can be a big chunk, don't have to. Even in the heating and the cooling space, the HVAC world, we're going to talk about things like set points and schedules. In the senior living space, when we talk about cooking, right, we've got natural gas, we've got exhaust fans that consume a lot. So there are a lot of kind of ways that your consumption and your opportunity is spread out across your facilities. And when I say facilities, I think what is so fascinating to me about the senior living space, Norma and I talk about this all the time when we're meeting with our clients, is you've really got a good mix of commercial and residential operations. And I find that fascinating, just a great challenge when it comes to, utility reduction. We're not just talking about kind of the traditional commercial building where we can, we might have these big sophisticated building automation systems, things like that. A lot of what we're talking about are townhomes, multi-family dwellings, like apartment complexes, duplexes, shared spaces where people live, right? And so that's what, it's kind of a cool, unique situation where we're applying best practice on the residential side, just like we're applying best practice on the commercial side. So we're going to talk about some of that today. So again, when we talk about what does 30% mean, most of these improvements, the thing that I want to touch on and that we're going to touch on today, most of these improvements involve low to no cost changes. So we don't want to just come in and suggest total capital retrofits or retro commissioning of facilities and just spend a ton of money to save some. We're going to look across kind of the whole gamut. And when we look at the mix of buildings on your campuses, again, they may be large buildings, they may be small residential dwellings, but there's opportunity kind of across the board. So jumping in, and let me make sure my screen is sharing. What do we mean when we talk about getting your data house in order? And that's where that question that we asked that talked about, how many of you are tracking your utility bills? We use that kind of phrase of you can't manage what you don't measure. And so what do we mean by getting your data house in order if we're kind of taking a phased approach to this plan? I kind of like to look at the data on your utility bills as, creating order from chaos. There's a lot of stuff there, right? You've got demand charges, you may see taxes and fees, you may see, meter usage, kilowatt hours, you may see crazy line items like a power factor, things like this. And that's kind of what I look at here on the top left of this graph is just there's a whole bunch of data points. And they're all jumbled around together. And how do we make sense? How do we create order from this chaos? And that's really what this graph represents as we progress from the far left to the far right is if we can begin to organize these data points, kind of draw that circle around it and get them in a central database, whether it be a system or whether it be an Excel spreadsheet, if we can begin to track it, we can begin to organize it. And that's what kind of the ordered square looks like. The squares go with the squares, the colors go with the colors, right? We can begin to make sense of what this tells us. And eventually that can lead to technology that helps us even predict what's going to happen next, right? So if we start looking at this pattern and we see this blank space. Based on the data we've been tracking, that far right graph can kind of help us predict what's going to happen next. And that's where, that's where data, it's not just kind of that quote unquote kind of boring phrase of, well, you let data drive your decisions, right? We say that for a reason, because creating order out of chaos is what's going to help kind of reduce that bottom line. And I agree, Norma, like you just said, I love this graphic. I love it as well. It's such a good visual. And so we're going to talk today about how we can naturally progress, right? We don't assume that, some of you on the call are going to go from not tracking your utility bills to being able to predict expenses in the future, from day one. There's necessarily kind of a crawl, walk, run approach, but we know that tracking that data, tracking your utility bills is step one. So some essential data points. I'll kind of leave this slide up here for a second. I know some of you may be taking notes. We'll certainly send out this slide deck as well. But a lot of you have all this stuff, right? If you're dude clients, and you're using the Works Hub as an example for your CMMS, or you're using the Energy Manager platform as well, those systems are designed to kind of consolidate and help you collect this information. So just knowing what you've got, I like to think of it as if I can take a snapshot of where the organization is today, this is a snapshot of what I want. Obviously, I want to know what types of buildings are on my campus. I want to know how big they are. I want to know how old they are. I want to have maintenance histories, right? I want to be able to group them together, residential buildings grouped together, shared space buildings grouped together. And then I want my utility billing data. And the good news about kind of this screen here is this information, like Zach said, is pretty readily available, right? It's not going to take a lot of digging to get it, especially your utility billing data. And the reason being is because it comes, more or less at the same time every month to the same person. And so understanding some of this basic information on the utility bill, how much do you use, whether it be electricity or water, how much does that cost? And then from the electricity perspective, do you have any other fees or, adders onto that cost, such as demand? A couple other things that, systems like the Energy Manager platform with Dude Solutions will help you gather quickly would be weather data. Down here in Alabama, where I live, very humid, very hot. We know that HVAC systems, need to be the right system in this climate, and we know that they're going to consume more electricity to cool a space than maybe a dry Denver, Colorado, as an example. So understanding weather and kind of using that to make decisions will be helpful as well. Interval data is something that I want to talk about on this screen. Many of you may have access to this data and not know it. And really what we're talking about here is just how does a building consume electricity in every 15 minutes, 15-minute intervals or 30-minute intervals or hourly intervals. And when I say you may have access to this data and not know it, utility providers are beginning to upgrade their infrastructure. And so they may have already done that on some of your larger, maybe shared space, common spaces. Norma and I were talking with some folks out in California a couple of weeks ago, large senior living community, and they did have, 3 interval meters on some of their larger spaces. And what this is going to give them and others the ability to do is not just look at the utility bills, which are typically right a 30 or 45-day lag behind when you actually consume that, but this will give you the ability to really drill down and zoom into a particular day, even a particular 15-minute window of that day, to understand if I've had increased cost or increased consumption at my building, I know exactly when that happened. And it may be system related, it may be control related, it may be operational related. And it gives you kind of more fine-tuned control to be able to understand where waste is happening in your buildings. So we can help you identify that. It's something that we're offering. Norma's really great about reaching out, and we can collect some information and help you discover if you do have this capability, this infrastructure installed. and we'd love to talk with you about it. So kind of following what we've talked about, we've talked about kind of bullet point one, there's opportunity, right? And not to beat a dead horse, but we know that our facilities do waste energy. We've talked about kind of step one. If we want to attack that energy waste and reduce it, we need to start tracking some things, right? We need to start tracking our utility bills. We need to start pulling in other data sets that we may have. And now what we're going to talk about is, what do we do with that data? When we keep saying the term track your bills or track your data, what are you looking for and what opportunities may arise because of that? And this is really, I would say, kind of the meat of what we're talking about today. Some things that you can take notes on, walk away with, really put some action behind what we're talking about. And so we've kind of got these steps, right? We call it making an action list. Some folks may call it strategic energy planning, right? We've got data, now what do we do with it? And so we're going to walk through these steps, step 1 through 5, and talk a little bit about them. But again, we want to know the likely areas of waste, kind of going back to that earlier slide that we saw of, your HVAC load is probably your biggest, followed by maybe some, your kitchen, right? Your cooking. Followed by lighting, things like this. And then we're gonna talk about a couple of things of, okay, how do you make sense of that data? Get to know your buildings, right? Compare them to similar buildings, compare them to others in your region, and how data can help you do that. From that, what are some takeaways? What are some common low to no cost actions that your peers are doing today? So we'll go ahead and dive in. So step 1, likely areas of waste. We've talked about this kind of in the healthcare, senior living type space. We know that heating and cooling make up the majority. HVAC, we know that. Because you've got a large residential side as well, water heating, right? If you've got gas water heaters, if you've got electric water heaters, right? Are those things tuned to the right degree? And what I mean is, the first thing that I did when we bought our house here in Alabama is I walked over to the water heater, gas water heater, and I saw that the previous occupant had that thing cranked up to as hot as it could go. So when that water came out of the pipe, it was hot, which feels great, right? But at the same time, that means that water heater is working overtime to maintain that maximum heat. And when you really think about it, does it need to do that, right? If the thing's not insulated, or it doesn't need to be, over 120 degrees, can I bump it down a little bit and still get warm, hot, comfortable shower or warm, hot water that I might need? It just doesn't need to be, scalding hot kind of idea. So water heating, and then of course lighting, and we can talk a little bit about some of these. But finding the likely areas of waste, and this graph kind of helps break that down. In your spaces, it would be HVAC and it would be water. It's kind of the top 2. But you'll have access to this Energy Information Administration survey, kind of breaking it down into not just what are likely systems that would consume the most, but based on your region of the country, i.e. in the Northeast, right, kind of that region 4 or even region 5 area, heating is going to be, they're going to be larger candidates. You're probably using gas during the winter months, whereas down here kind of in the Southeast, we're using electricity during the summer months. So understanding, kind of where you're at is going to have a huge impact. Again, comparing your buildings to one another. So there's 2 things, and these are obviously screenshots from the Energy Manager platform, but again, these things can be done kind of system agnostic. Compare your buildings. Benchmarking is kind of an industry standard for a reason. If I've got 20 townhomes, if I've got 2 common areas, they all do the same jobs, right? My townhomes are residential spaces, my common areas are common areas. But when I compare them to each other, and I see that 1 or maybe 2 of those residential dwellings are far more inefficient than the others, then I know where to start, right, I can start asking some questions. Why? Are there older systems, older infrastructure, not insulated? You know, we don't have any programmable thermostats. You know, there are 1,000 different things of why it could be, but at least I know the increase or the waste is happening here compared to everyone else. And I can also look at it from the other side of the coin, right? I'm going to make something up. If I've got 5, you know, residential dwellings and, you know, one of them is doing great, the other 4 are not doing good, well, then I can kind of ask the inverse question, what am I doing at this one property that sets it apart? And can I duplicate it elsewhere? And so that's what kind of these, you know, this benchmarking helps us do. Energy Star, you know, it's a branch of the EPA. These Energy Star scores, it's a very familiar brand, right? You got Energy Star equipment, Energy Star dishwashers, washing machines, refrigerators, et cetera. But it's also a benchmarking database that allows you to say, hey, how does my campus compare to other campuses in my region, in the country? And that's what these scores give you that you kind of see on the top left is just the ability to say, what's my letter grade? Am I a C? Am I an A plus? Right? And what that letter grade says is you're an A plus compared to all the others, or you're a C compared to all the others. Similarly, on the right, this tree mat facility is an internal benchmark. Like we were just talking about, if I've got all these properties that are similar, are most of them green, are some of them red, or some of them yellow, who are the outliers? And that's what benchmarking and tree maps help you do, is to quickly identify if I've got multiple properties on campus, which ones are the outliers. When we drill down further, right, when we start looking at data from your utility bills, and this is pretty indicative of something you can track in a spreadsheet. You've got some data points here. And one of the things that a lot of our organizations do when they come to us is they may say, hey, you know, we're just paying the bills and moving on, or we're tracking in a spreadsheet, and they're more focused on one column versus another. What I mean is they may be more focused on cost. How much do my utilities cost me? Right? Or they may be only focused on usage. How much am I using? And we want to make sure that we're looking at these two data sets together because when they're out of whack, right? If I see, you know, 25% or 40% increase in cost compared to a certain time frame, but I don't see an increase in my usage, did I have a rate increase? Am I getting charged some type of fee because I hit a kicker? You know, is the bill wrong, right? Is it just a billing error? And kind of vice versa. So we want to correlate these things to make sure that both my usage and my cost trends remain flat or go down, right, in the best scenario. And correlating those two together, or maybe looking at a unit cost, like a cost per square foot, kind of helps me understand if there are things happening on the bill that we may be getting charged for based on the rate that we're on, we can see some of that stuff in the data. So one of the things, if you see a high unit cost, you know, a cost per square foot or a cost per day, and you don't see kind of a correlating increase in usage, meaning your costs have gone up, but your usage has stayed the same, you may be hitting some kicker or some tier in your rate, like a power factor adjustment, meaning the utility company has to be ready to supply you with a certain amount of electricity, but your building's just not using it. But we're going to charge you a fee because we supplied it, we had it ready for you, and you just didn't use it, right? So there are things, and that may help justify decreasing your rates. That may, you know, go into a different rate. It may help justify a lot of things, but you definitely want to be looking for some of those outliers in the billing data as well. And then, of course, your demand charges. I mean, we talk about this all the time. For some of your larger areas, your more common spaces that consume the most, demand can sometimes make up 60% of that bill. And what we can look at, you know, certain things that cause increased demand would be, you know, how your systems are performing. Are they coming all online at the same time? Is it certain times of the day that we may need to adjust some set points to make sure that, hey, if there's a peak time during the day, that we may do the same job, i.e. cooking or laundry. We may actually save money by shifting when we perform those services. at a different time of day, depending on what rate you're on. That's one of the things I jokingly talk with my wife about is, hey, listen, we can set our washing machine or our dishwasher, things like that, to do its job overnight. It may run the same amount of time, right? It may consume the exact same amount of electricity, but because we're shifting that operation to an off-peak time, we're actually saving money. So there's some strategies that we can look at there based on what your rate is on. Cost avoidance models, we talk about this. It's a great way, again, when we're comparing data and we're looking at data, what we're saying is, what's a baseline year? What's a good year that we can compare against? And when we talk about cost avoidance, it's more advanced comparison. It allows us to take that weather into account that we talked about earlier, or it allows us to take other variables like occupancy into account. So to put this into kind of real world speak, if during this COVID situation where unfortunately we've had limited interaction between residents and the public, residents are staying indoors more perhaps, occupancy is increased in our buildings. We're not out of them as much as we might have been in the past. And so is that the cause for our increased consumption? So we can normalize for those types of things. And essentially what it helps us do is say, hey, red bar is what we should be spending against that baseline year. Blue bar may be what we're spending now because we've done some of these projects. And we'll talk about it a little later. So a lot of cost avoidance reports are great after we do something. Install programmable thermostats, move to LED lighting, get a new chiller system kind of idea. Cost avoidance is going to be your best friend when it comes to reporting to a board. These are the savings that we've incurred. And if you're not sure how these work, because they are a little bit more advanced, depending on where you're at in your journey, again, we've got trainings, we've got classes. You can sit down with one of our engineers to talk about how this stuff works, but it's great data for reporting on the back end. Interval data is the same thing, right? When we talk about data that can help tell a story and can help kind of pinpoint and fine tune our operations, you can kind of see what we circled here. Why did we have a big spike in our consumption and our demand, even though the weather the temperature decreased, right? And the temperature being that kind of dotted line that you see. So logic would say, hey, if it's cooler outside or if it's warmer, depending on the time of year, why are we still or even seeing probably the largest demand spike in this monthly period? Usually this is indicative of some type of temperature setback or equipment malfunction where it didn't turn off when it needed to turn off, or some type of sensor problem. But it helps us make sure that we catch this immediately rather than 45 or 30 days later getting a utility bill and seeing a big demand charge and we don't know where it came from. So now that we've kind of looked at some of those, what do we mean when we say look at our data? And again, I know there's a lot of data that we can look at, and we can start basic or we can get kind of complex. But the real thing is now, what do I do with it, right? If I have benchmarked my buildings together, and I've understood that these two residential homes are consuming the most, they're the outliers, or this common area is the candidate that's wasting my energy, what can I do? Right, and that's where some of these things on the left here, and again, we'll send the slide deck out. These are really common adjustments that can be made that have anywhere from a 1 month payback to about a year and a half. And some of these simple things that we should be looking at, we should audit our thermostats, our controls regularly. For these exact reasons. Take that one at the very bottom, a set point modification. Are you still cooling or heating the building at the same fixed temperature that you have been for decades? And if so, why? Right? Is the same set point that you had when that was a brand new building, is it still the best set point? Was your occupancy the same originally to what it is now? And I see this all the time in where waste happens is facilities are repurposed, meaning what they were designed for is no longer what they were used for. but nothing else has changed. We still have the same systems running. We still have the same set points set up. And so a good audit of how your facilities are being used and what they're being heated or cooled to, a 1 month payback, right? If I move from a cool 72 degrees to a cool 73 degrees or 74 degrees, right? Is there some things that we can do, you know, that still fall within health regulations that we can find some savings? Same thing with some of those in the middle: occupant behavior modifications, scheduling, starts and stops, any adjustments that we can make to some of those controls or some of those set points. I'll give you an example. This doesn't have to be a really complicated process. So again, kind of play into that residential side. I had a rebate for a Nest thermostat. And Norman and I actually talked with some folks a couple of months ago, and their organization, their utility provider, also offered rebates if you install some smart thermostat. And so they're giving like $200 or $300 for every little Nest thermostat that you would install. And I find that to be a really great real world takeaway is you get some grant or some rebate money from the utility. You go into your residents' dwellings, you install these Nest thermostats, and they're smart. They're smart thermostats. And what they mean is they know when it's occupied. They know when it's unoccupied. You can set little schedules to them. And what it does is make sure that, hey, if I'm a resident, but I'm not in my home for 6 hours of the day, why is it cooled as if I was? Or why is it heated as if I was? Because that kind of start and stop throughout the day to maintain that set point, there's waste happening. And so just by installing those little Nest thermostats and getting some rebate money back is a great takeaway, just to make sure that, hey, kind of one of these top measures that you can do of schedules and kind of fine tuning those will be some savings opportunities. And this right column, don't forget the non-energy benefits. There's a lot of things that we can do, especially on the residential side. You may not even be paying the bills for your residents. So why would you care? Why would it help you? And there's a couple of those, especially those kind of 3 bullet points in the middle. If you're making sure that you're changing filters or you're doing preventative maintenance, you're going to save over the life of that equipment. You're going to reduce maintenance costs, and you're going to increase occupant productivity. And that's especially important, especially those last 2 bullet points in the healthcare space. All these studies that talk about, you know, natural lighting and clean air, things like that, has health benefits on top of it. I have mentioned always checking for free money, whether you're using our system to search for grants, to search for rebates, or whether you're going on your utility website to search for grants and rebates, they exist all over the place. And so, like I mentioned, those programmable thermostats are a good win. A lot of utilities will pay for insulation. You know, a lot of things that you can do, get rebates on windows. Make sure that if you do some type of project that you have at least checked to make sure that there's funding available. As you can see, that last bullet point, the situation we find ourselves in with COVID, we've got some stimulus dollars that are likely coming soon, just like we saw back in 2008, 2009. Finally, get help, right? And what we mean by get help, audits, right? Talk with your peers. There are resources available to you that don't have to cost anything, even to help you identify where waste is happening in your facilities. So I know we're coming right up here on this 10-minute warning. The last couple of things that I'll just talk about here, and I don't know, Zach, do we have a poll coming up soon?
We do, but a little later on, so you can keep on trucking. And
okay.
Then, yep.
Okay, perfect. What I mean by track, right? We've talked about taking a snapshot of where we are. What does the data tell us? Okay, and based on that data, what should I do? Right? Where can I prioritize, you know, projects or little operational adjustments? This last phase, track what you've done. It's probably hands down the most overlooked part of any type of reduction strategy when it comes to utilities, is just showing the results. And I started to say showing the success of that project, but I think that actually lends itself to saying sometimes these projects don't perform like we thought. Sometimes we may work with an ESCO provider or a performance contractor or just an engineering firm that says, hey, these are the guaranteed or the estimated savings. We'll do those projects and then never track to see how they perform. We just assume because it was done, we're going to be seeing a payback. And one of the best examples of that would be lighting. LED lighting retrofits are a no-brainer. It's basic math. You've got a certain wattage bulb that you had, you go down to a lower wattage bulb, you know you're going to be saving. But what's interesting is our clients over the last, 5, 6 years, once some of that rebate money has kind of dried up from 2008, 2009, the upfront cost of that capital project of lighting retrofits is increasing the payback period. Meaning it may be 8, 9 years before you get a return on that lighting investment if you don't have some of that grant money available. And so tracking the results of those projects have helped our clients say, listen, we're going to pause. We're not going to do any large LED capital project any longer. We're going to do kind of a run to fail strategy, meaning when bulbs and ballasts go out, we'll replace them with LED, but we want a little bit more cash flow on hand. So we're not going to do this project in bulk. And that can be duplicated over a number of different projects. So being able to track, celebrate success when it's there, red bar, blue bar type reports. This is what we were paying. This is what we're now paying. They're a big deal. And they're really going to be the data that you need, that your board needs to make sure that if we want to fund this project or these projects moving forward, we have data that supports it. So in summary, this is the 10% rule that we talk about. We have covered a lot today. And so there's a study that says, hey, you're only going to, as the days progress from this webinar, you're only going to remember 10% after a certain number of days. So if there's a 10% that I want you to walk away from and remember, they would be these bullet points. Number 1, your buildings are wasting energy. Number 2, most of this waste can be eliminated with some basic improvements. Not all of it, most of it. Data is going to be fundamental in helping you identify where that waste is happening. And don't be afraid of that data, right? Those two things kind of work together. You've got it. Don't be scared of it. There's technology that helps you understand it. There's resources like Dude Solutions or other consultants that might help you understand it if you don't have a background in energy management. Those low to no cost actions, they're going to have fast payback. And it may be a strategy where you do a bunch of little things that cost less, add up to large savings. And then of course, tracking those actions help you celebrate your successes, or they help you push pause when you need to push pause and not waste some of that cash flow. So that being said, I think we do have a poll now. What we're going to do here, I do want to bring Norma in, and Zach, if you want to throw this poll slide up, we'll publish the results of that, and then we'll do some Q&A.
Sure. So hi, everybody. This is Norma. I've been here kind of in the background, just listening. I want to thank you all for taking some time to jump on here as far as to just really learn and understand more as far as the opportunities that are available when it comes to energy and utilities. So as we pause for a second, I know we've gone through the webinar. I just want you to take a step back. And as we look at this now, the biggest poll we have, kind of, what did you feel like your biggest obstacle to managing energy has been? When you were coming onto this webinar, I know I'm curious, I want to see what's going on with the ROI. What did you feel like your biggest obstacle was? So I want to give you a chance to kind of just think about that and go ahead and answer.
Yep, and Norma, we're getting some responses, so I'll leave it up for a little bit longer.
Okay, perfect. And also, in the meantime, if there's any questions that you want to ask, don't forget about the question and answer kind of bar at the bottom. I know Dan went through a lot of information, a lot of great information, so feel free to ask any questions that you have.
Cool. So Norma, just to let you know the responses, we had 3 predominant winners, gaining buy-in at the leadership level with 38%, I'm overloaded and don't have enough time at 38%, and then a lack of expertise in energy management.
Okay, great. And that's really on trend with what I've been hearing kind of across the board when I'm talking with my senior living clients. So that really falls into the biggest thing. I don't have time to be a data entry clerk with all the different things that I'm juggling in, or, hey, accounting pays it, or they just sign it and pay it. So, how would I get buy-in? So the purpose of this webinar was to really provide you with some information to kind of, first off, turn the mountain into a molehill, because it can look like a mountain when you're first kind of approaching it, but also for us to be able to kind of partner with you to help create a plan to overcome and shift that obstacle. Just from, working with a lot of our clients, the feedback that we've been getting. So what I love to do, I know I've been on different webinars. I've, just learning and educating myself. I know one big thing, kind of when you jump on these, you're like, I don't want to be inundated after this with a bunch of emails or a million different people calling me. So I really wanted to introduce myself, put a face to the name, so that if you're interested in the Energy Manager platform, and we just put a poll up as well, if you'd like to get more information, I'll be working one-on-one with you. So it's not some bot or not a bunch of different people. I really wanted to just make that human connection, especially in a time where we're all on Zoom and computers and in the house. I have two sons that are 4 and 5 that are on either side of me at the same time. So I know we're all multitasking, but I really want to be able to partner with you and just really be able to help you work with your team, with your leadership, to really identify those areas, because a lot of you, the utilities falls under the maintenance budget, but you don't have any insight into what you can do to bring those dollars back, how you can reallocate those dollars for things for yourself. I know one of my clients, we joke, take those dollars to get you an admin assistant, with just the amount of stuff that's on your plate and the paperwork side. So I really want to partner with you. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to listen. I'm here to help leverage us and our experience, and really just build a plan tailored to what it is that you need. So if you'd like to, for more information, you'd like to work with me, you'd like to kind of pick brains, get a plan together, feel free to, put for the Energy Manager. And then I know shooting it over to Zach, we're going to answer any questions that may have popped up along the way. But I appreciate you all jumping on today and just really being a great crowd.
Awesome. Thanks, Norma. Appreciate that. So yes, we are now going to shift over into the Q&A portion of our presentation. We've gotten a couple of questions, and so I'm just going to say them, and then Dan and Norma, if you guys want to throw in your thoughts, or if one person wants to take them, I'll let you guys decide. So first question is, if I'm starting fresh, if I'm starting from scratch, what would you do if you were in my shoes? What are like the first kind of order of operations things that you would do? Dan, you want to take that one?
Mm-hmm.
Call Norma.
Yeah, I'll take it. Yeah, I'll take it. Norma, I'm thinking you'll probably have some insight too, and some more what our clients have been doing. Zach, I think I would start with kind of how I approached like a residential home. I know we talked about a lot of things today, a lot of different, complex options, easy options, because of most of the folks on the call are in kind of different stages of their journey. The first thing that I do with really any property, especially senior living, is programmable thermostats. And I wanted to say something like programmable controls, but I know a lot of senior living facilities might not have like a building automation control, or might not need it. And I know I mentioned that kind of Nest thermostat example a couple of times. And that the reason that I mentioned it is because with very little oversight, programmable controls, you're going to see savings almost immediately. For example, in my home, compared to the same time frame last year, I'm saving about $50 a month. And that's some pretty massive savings in a residential home, $50 a month. I know that may not sound like much, but those little programmable thermostats, even if it's like the basic stuff, like, from 7 p.m. until 5 a.m., this is the temperature that we need to run at. And from 5 a.m. until, 2 p.m., here's a different temperature, right? Just being able to set different times of the day, different temperatures, you're immediately going to see savings. as opposed to just saying, hey, this building, this townhome, this apartment is going to be cooled at this spot. That does take resident buy-in, obviously, and I think it's beneficial to your residents if they are paying their utilities. You're giving them opportunities to save some money, or if you guys are paying for it for your residents, I would just look at those programmable thermostats as a good first step, and then of course you can get rebate dollars for them as well. Norma, I don't know if you've seen anything or have another kind of starting place if you're going from starting fresh.
No, I think, to be honest, we kind of touched on it. I think the biggest thing is being able to get insight into what you're spending. I would say that's the biggest thing to start, to even begin to start, because you can't know if you're wasting, if it's sky high, what's going on, if you're not seeing your bills, if you're not having the opportunity to sit down and take a look at those bills. So for me, what I would say, I mean, that's an action item for me. If I'm looking at on the management side of just getting started, you need to see where your money is going. You need to see what your usage is, what your consumption is. So if that means partnering with the business office, because I know it's siloed many times, where it's very siloed, but either asking for that information or, partnering with us to be able to get that information. But that's absolutely kind of the building block for where to start.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was great. Just one other point. I know, Dan, that you said getting resident buy-in is of the utmost importance. And just to give a additional point, was on a presentation the other day where all of our residents right now are probably in the baby boomer generation, and that has actually been labeled as the greenest generation. So as you talk about these measures that you might be implementing, if you really explain why this is going to be good for your organization, a lot of times I think our residents will be able to understand what we're trying to do. So just a tidbit I wanted to throw in. The next, go ahead.
Actually, before you go on with that, you actually just triggered. I had a conversation with a building manager or facility manager with senior living last year, in fact, and he made a great point. They were getting ready to move forward with our utility tracking software, and he was talking about how great this is going to be for some of his residents, that they're going to have input in the system. And I kind of asked him a little bit more about it, and he was like, Dan, you sometimes forget that our residents have experience. And we've got retired engineers, we've got retired architects, we've got retired, contractors, all these residents that might have experience in this field. And he was really excited to get the system going because he had, this one retired engineer in mind that was like all about energy reduction and savings. And it's kind of like an extra staff person that's going to be helping kind of drive some of the change in the community that he lives in. And I thought that was just such a unique, use case where it's not just something where you guys on the call have to manage your communities by yourselves. You've got a lot of experience from some of the residents that live there. So good point, Zach.
Awesome. So I think we got time for one more question. Going to give a little context to this one. I know that a lot of our clients that we work with here at Dude, it's not just one facility or one site. A lot of them maybe even span across different states, across different climate zones. And so the question is, how important is benchmarking my utility use in the industry? So Dan or Norma, I don't know who wants to take it first.
Yeah, Norma, I think you can talk a little bit about, like you said, mentioning the working with like your business office, in terms of there may be kind of a parent or a corporate entity that manages a lot of different campuses. I think you've seen that a lot out in California and being able to compare those together.
Yes, I have. And one of the biggest things I know when talking with our clients, when we think about benchmarking, when we think about really creating a roadmap for yourself, when you think about your day to day, your texts, the maintenance things that have to go on. Just when you're things that are popping up throughout the day, that something is on fire here or over here. So really time really having a dollar value attached to it being the most important thing, and something that you also can't get back. When you're able to benchmark, when you're able to see what's going on across your community, then you're not kind of shooting in the dark when something is breaking or when something is falling apart, or when something has failed. You're being able to really create a strategic plan so that you're able to really strategically use the assets that you have available. So send my tech to work over here. This building is much more inefficient. This is where we need to focus our dollars. It really helps to create a roadmap, a really clear picture to be able to start seeing where to allocate your efforts, and then how to also leverage those efforts to start replicating that kind of across your communities. And like we say, I know Dan said it so many times on here, but you really can't hit a moving target. If you don't know what's going on, there's no way you're going to achieve it. And you'll throw different things around. But I think we all agree that even with the changes that have come with COVID, I know your day to day has just the responsibilities, the different temperature checks and package checks and all of that. Your time is the most important thing. So when I think about benchmarking and the importance of that, it really is to be able to give you that roadmap, give you that full picture of your organization, and then be able to know where to best spend my efforts, because my time is very valuable. I don't have time to be running around kind of chasing or trying to figure out different things in that way.
Yep. Yeah, I wouldn't even add anything to that, Norma. I think you're exactly right. It's just, there's a reason we compare, and we compare to find the outliers, and that's the time efficiency game there. So good point.
Awesome. Good conversation. And Dan and Norma, thanks so much for taking us through this. Appreciate everyone hopping on the call. Like we've said, a recording of this presentation and the slides themselves will be sent out afterwards. So again, just want to thank everyone and hope everyone has a great rest of the week. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.